I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson, and I'm here to tell you about a movie that you'll want to go see. Make plans. It's coming next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, June 9th through 11th, to theaters. The name of the film is The American Miracle. Poster looks like this. It is based on a best-selling book by Michael Medved, whom some of you will have read his books. Many of you, like me, will have heard him on the radio for many, many years. And he is very excited to see his book based on the founding of our country come to life. And it's got some interesting and surprising things in there, I think. But before we talk to Michael Medved, here is a sneak peek at The American Miracle.
I came to persuade you to avoid these dangers.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
If our union is to hold together, something must be done.
He will become founder of a mighty empire.
The fate of unborn millions now depends under God upon the conduct and courage of this army.
Various founders talked about this providential experiment that God had ordained and intervened at this unique moment in American history to make all of this happen.
Most of them believed that there were no accidents in history.
That hope for liberty was the light that under God, He would lead them.
All eyes are open or opening to the rights of man.
Am I all mankind?
We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it.
It cannot be denied that with America and in America, a new era commences in human affairs.
America is something that I hold in my heart.
Americans of today should regain our bearings, that our nation is no accident.
That is The American Miracle, again in theaters next week for 3 days only, June 9th through the 11th. So you'll want to go to AmericanMiracleMovie.com, find out where it's playing near you. And now, the gentleman who is bringing us the film, brought us the best-selling book as well, Michael Medved, joins us, and I just got to tell you, I spent a lot of time listening to this gentleman on the radio, whether he's talking about pop culture or movies or politics. So it's a joy to have him. Michael Medved, welcome to Life Today Live. Good to see you.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you, and thanks for listening.
Absolutely. I will continue to listen because you're getting ready to go on the air soon today. Talk to me a little bit about the film. I mean, this is a passion of yours, obviously, the book, and I know it takes years to get films done and things like that. I'm guessing you're fairly excited about this release.
I am. I've had American Miracle is my 14th book, and a couple of others were adapted for movies or TV shows, and I wasn't thrilled. This film is different, and partially because of the terrific people I had the chance to work with. And the film, as you probably know, is a combination of interviews with leading historians from the finest academic institutions in the world, and recreations of historical figures. I had recently a wonderful compliment. Somebody complimented me on the writing of the film. And he said, just some of the speeches that you put in, the speech you gave to Benjamin Franklin, I didn't put it in. Benjamin Franklin. And it was at the Constitutional Convention. I think that this is one of the first films ever to present a serious historical portrayal of what the Constitution Constitutional Convention was like in Philadelphia in 1787. And Benjamin Franklin did give a remarkable speech in which he talked about, and again, he was a religious nonconformist, but he talked about God's providence and the necessary role of providence in starting the country.
You know, our country has taken a beating in academia and in the media some lately, certainly outside our borders. And I think some of it runs parallel to the resistance to the idea of God's involvement even in human affairs, however you even want to frame that, right? What are you trying to capture when you look at the miracle aspect of our nation?
Basically, how unlikely some of these developments were, and how the founders themselves, and again, including people like Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, who were a religious nonconformists, they did have a deist approach, and yet they all believed, and George Washington very much believed, that God was responsible for the rise of the United States of America. And Benjamin Franklin said in that famous speech, it's the only speech he gave because he was in his 80s at the time of the Constitutional Convention. And he gave a speech where the theme is that if a sparrow cannot fall to earth without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his blessing? And that's powerful. And one of the questions that the founders put forward, there's another way of saying it. I'm very fond of the Bismarck quote, who once said in the 1870s that God has special protection for lost dogs, children, imbeciles, drunkards, and the United States of America. And may that continue.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. So, how do you think this plays? I mean, it's historically accurate, but it's also a perspective that has been undermined. How do you think this plays in the current climate of, what I consider anti-Americanism? People would look at you and say, "Oh, he's a Christian nationalist," which is like a dirty term or something. But where does this land at this moment in history?
First of all, I'm Jewish and very proud to be, and try to be a religiously observant Jew. But with that, I think that the core of Americans, and again, all across the religious divide, believe in what George Washington cited in his first inaugural address in 1789, which is he spoke of the invisible hand. That there are great tides in history, and so many people, Leo Tolstoy, the whole idea of the novel War and Peace, is that there is a will in history. And the film begins with this amazing moment in 1826, on the 4th of July. It was the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And there was celebration all over the country because it was the Jubilee year. And that same day, the two people most responsible for the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, both passed away. Mm-hmm. And this was viewed by people who were alive at the time, including John Adams' son, John Quincy Adams, who was president at the time. It was viewed as an indication of divine involvement in our affairs. We reproduce a speech that Daniel Webster, who was then a member of the House of Representatives, gave in Faneuil Hall in Boston. And that's another thing about the movie. We had the opportunity to film in the actual historic sites that we are describing. And Mount Vernon has not been featured in films before. Wow. But when George Washington is sitting at his writing desk in Mount Vernon corresponding about attending the Constitutional Convention, that's George Washington's real writing desk. And by the way, the actor we have playing George Washington has been recapturing George Washington for 30 years at Mount Vernon, his historical monument home.
Yeah, I noticed that, and actually, I'm a little bit of a movie nerd. That's part of the reason I've listened to you a lot. Is I actually studied film in school, went the television route, but I love the whole cinematic process, right? The movie making process. And I was watching the trailer and some of the clips, and I was like, I think they were right there. So, I mean, you authenticated not just the words in recreating the characters, true to form, but the locations?
Yes, that's right. Well, I will tell you, one, it is virtually impossible to get into the National Historical Monument that is Independence Hall, which is where both the Constitution and the Declaration were drafted and signed. However, there is a replica of Independence Hall, down to the furnishings, down to the windows, everything, that was built in Houston, Texas.
Really?
Yes, built for a Christian university in Houston. And they very graciously allowed us to use that outstanding replica of the real Independence Hall.
All right. I wasn't going to tell, but you like truth in all of your presentations, so
Full exposure, absolutely.
So one aspect that you do touch on, and this is a sore point for a lot of people, very controversial. I think a generous view of history when we look at the times in which these speeches were given, the Declaration was signed, the nation was formed. It was a time of slavery, and that is a hard part for, I think, a lot of people to look back on and go, oh yeah, our nation was, founded as a miracle, but yet slavery existed. How do you address that?
Well, it's addressed by the truth about slavery and the strong feelings that were anti-slavery by many of the founders, including people like Washington and Jefferson, who were slave owners but felt appropriately guilty about it. We tell the story also that most people don't know of Elizabeth Freeman, who was known as Mom Bet, who was a slave in Massachusetts at the time of the American Revolution. And in 1780, they drafted the Massachusetts state constitution, and they borrowed the words from the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal and endowed by their creator. They used those words. So this household slave of a judge in Massachusetts sued for her freedom. And in a really, truly remarkable story, and she won. And she is played by a wonderful young actress named Nicole Mullen, who is also a very prominent singer, who sings a song called Freedom at the end of the movie.
Oh yeah, we know Nicole around here. She's been part of Life Today, and so yeah, that's exciting to see her in that role. And I really think that's an important thing for you to address. I appreciate the way you do it, because essentially our nation was drafted on foundational documents that would not allow slavery to remain. I mean, they undermined it from the get-go.
Right. And one of the things that most people don't recognize, which is really, really important, is they protected the slave trade for 20 years after the ratification of the Constitution. That would bring us to 1808. And in 1808, under President Thomas Jefferson, they eliminated the slave trade, the earliest possible date they could under the draft of the Constitution. And a clear majority of the people who were there at the Constitutional Convention wanted to eliminate slavery at that time in 1787, 1788, when the Constitution was ratified. And the fact that they did move, and that Jefferson moved and wrote powerfully about it, to eliminate the slave trade as soon as they possibly could. Had they only been able to go further, the difficulty, of course, was trying to keep the country together, because these were 13 very loosely affiliated colonies. And the fact that they stayed together and they were able to compromise here, there, everywhere on the Constitution. We have on screen Akil Reed Amar, who is probably the most respected constitutional scholar. He's at Yale Law School, and he actually has been cited more often by Supreme Court cases than any other scholar. And he talks about the issue very directly of slavery and how they finessed the issue to allow the country to take shape.
Yeah, I mean, and you talk about a difficult thing to put those words and those declarations into practice. I mean, it took a long time. How do you think this plays today? You know, unfortunately, a lot of younger people have been taught some things that simply aren't true about our country. A lot of us just don't know. A lot of us just need the reminder. What do you want people to? What kind of sense of history and perspective do you want people to have when they walk out of this film?
The idea that there is such a thing as providence, and that what's fascinating to me is a lot of people, you ask them, how do you think that it is that America, which was part of a very lightly settled continent, these were not closely connected settlements, how did this end up becoming the most powerful nation on earth, the most influential nation ever? And for a lot of people, that idea, it cannot be accidental, because there have been so many breaks that America has caught. We follow some of them, some of the battles of the Revolutionary War that prevented the capture of the Continental Army and the end of the war in 1776. And those things were recognized by the British at the time as arguably providential. And that's dramatized in the film. So basically, when people look at American history, you're right. There are many people, young people in particular, who feel guilt. We're trying to inspire a different feeling, starts with G, which is gratitude.
Yeah.
Which is very appropriate. Richard Dreyfuss is in the film, Academy Award-winning actor. And toward the very end of the film, he talks about his love for America and his gratitude for what this country means and always has meant.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, I can give another quote from Bismarck, German chancellor of the 19th century, who once said, "It is the job of a statesman to listen for God's footsteps in history and then to grab his coattails and hang on." And that's the kind of attitude that we would like to try to encourage.
You can get that in The American Miracle, again, in theaters next week. You can go to the website. It looks like this. Find tickets, AmericanMiracleMovie.com. I would encourage you to follow up. You can also go to MichaelMedved.com, by the way, if you want to follow up on his radio show and see all that he is up to. So some good resources for you there. And Michael, I appreciate you joining us today. I'm curious whether you are bullish on America right now. Are you hopeful for the future? I mean, it's been, and we look at, the almost night and day differences between administrations, right, over the last just few years now. Are we going in the right direction overall? I mean, I know there's things here and there that we can both nitpick on, but generally, are we doing okay?
I think we're finding our way. As always, when you look at the history of the country and some of the hardships and disasters that we've been through and that we've, with God's help, survived, it's a foolish bet to bet against the United States of America. And this goes to one of the last lines in the film, which I have the privilege of delivering because I wrote it. But the line is that people look at America and they will say, well, this isn't providence. It's a pattern of happy accidents. There are all kinds of accidents about natural resources and things that are sort of strange and inexplicable, like the two second and third president dying on the same day. and they were friends. And that, by the way, is an important thing, is Adams and Jefferson ran against each other for president twice. Adams won the first time in 1796, and then Jefferson won in 1800 in a contested election. And they hated each other. And they reconciled and became dear friends, which you will also see on the July 4th in which they both died. But the point about happy accidents is if you have a pattern of happy accidents, it's still a pattern. And if you believe that there is a higher force that shapes history and that has always shaped history and is particularly true for this country, then I hope for the best when we overcome some of the bitterness and divisiveness and negativity that is too much present in our politics today.
Yeah, and one of the best remedies for that, all the negativity, is what you said just a moment ago. It's gratitude. And so I hope people will watch The American Miracle. And, you know, I'm sure you've been around the world. I've spent a lot of time in some of the worst places, you know, economically and structurally in this world. And every time, you know, I come back, I'm like, man, we live in a great country. I got my complaints, but man, we do. I still think it's the best country on the face of the earth.
There's no doubt. This is a very deep and personal thing for me because my grandparents came from Ukraine. And again, we still have some distant family that is back in Ukraine and suffering horribly with the difficulties that have been there. Part of the story of my grandparents, my grandfather came to Philadelphia in 1905, and to earn enough money to send for his wife, my grandmother, and her 6 children. And unfortunately, they were unable to get out of the country because World War I started. And then World War I was followed by the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War and mass starvation. My grandmother had 6 children. 5 of them died before she got over to the United States in 1924. And then when she came to the United States, she had her own terrible fear. She was 50. She had been separated from my grandfather for 10 years. And she got very sick right after she arrived here. And she was absolutely certain she had some kind of terrible tumor. She couldn't keep food down. She was very uncomfortable. She went to the doctor. And he said, sit down. He said, and she was crying. And she said, I have a tumor, right? He says, no, you don't have a tumor. You have a baby. And she said, no, that's impossible. I'm 50 years old. And the doctor apparently said, your name is Sarah, isn't it? And it was. And that baby was my father.
Oh, wow.
Who was born in Philadelphia in 1926. And I miss him greatly. And he took me as a little boy in Philadelphia to the Liberty Bell and to Independence Hall and to Valley Forge and the Franklin Institute, where they had this magnificent statue of Ben Franklin. And I think about how much my dad and my grandfather, who very proudly became an American citizen at the end of his life, how much they would relate and feel grateful and I hope proud of this film.
I love that. And you know what's interesting is you talk about the American Miracle. One aspect of the American Miracle is what you're talking about in the different cultures, people coming here for hope, for freedom. My great-grandparents came to Philadelphia on my father's side, biological, for those of you wondering, don't get confused, from Ireland, fleeing the famine, depending on how you look at it.
The Great Hunger.
The Great Hunger, exactly right. And you look and you go, okay, all these disparate people, even those, who were now descended from slaves. I was in Africa this year, and, even those who didn't come here by their own volition and choice have benefited from this miracle in a lot of ways, and can benefit more when you understand what you're talking about, that this is the place of opportunity, of more freedom than you're going to find in most places on this earth. And when we choose gratitude over guilt and grumbling and grudges
and grievance.
There you go. Then we can make it a better place, because it's not perfect. You and I know that, but there is hope.
Yeah, and that's very much what the founders believed. That's another thing that I find very peculiar is, so when you ask people, how do you think America went from being a non-nation, just isolated settlements, to being this great and powerful nation? And there are people who will say, well, there was just a remarkable group of people then. Because you have Adams and Franklin and Washington and Hamilton and Madison, they're all living at the same time. Okay, that's not an accident either. And there's something else about all of these remarkable founders. They all believed in divine providence. And they all believed, Washington in his first inaugural address talked about, we have always relied upon the invisible hand. Yeah. And in fact, at one point, I thought about titling the book and then the movie, The Invisible Hand, but that sounds like a horror movie. And, and that's not what we wanted to convey at all.
You know, I actually wrote a book with Senator Rand Paul several years ago where we just quoted from speeches from every president talking about just that, you know, the faith.
Right, I have that book. I have that book, and it's terrific because you include some presidents that most people haven't heard of, and yet who had some religious feeling that was sometimes surprisingly deep.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember the contribution you had in there from President Polk. James K. Polk.
Yeah.
And that was a lovely book. Congratulations.
Yeah, well, I'm flattered that you're familiar with it. It was an incredible exercise because you say I mentioned some presidents that you don't think about. Every single president, and I wrote that under Obama's term, and even in some of his speeches, they acknowledge God. So there's this acknowledgement that is consistent all the way back. So anyway.
Right. And there's a beautiful speech, as you know, it was the one inaugural address by Calvin Coolidge, who people don't think he's South Silent Cal. You don't think he could be so eloquent, but he was talking about America's role to bring justice and liberty and hope and deliverance and faith to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, Michael Medved, I appreciate your efforts to remind people. I know you've done this your whole life, and I'm thrilled that one of your books is in a film that people can go see, and I would encourage them to do it. Anything you want to add before I let you go? I just love the conversation. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. We're just very proud of all the people participating in this film. Thomas Jefferson was 83 when he died, and he is played by somebody else who's fairly well known, who's 83, Pat Boone. And we're very pleased that he participated. And he loved the idea that the young Thomas Jefferson is played by Kevin Sorbo. So we have a cast that I'm very proud of, and again, and some of the academics, to hear the agreement when people are talking about the course of the American Revolution, the fact that George Washington was not only the indispensable man, he was the indestructible man. He came so close to death so many times in the French and Indian War, as a teenager, then in the American Revolution. And he believed that he was preserved for a singular purpose, which was launching this wonderful experiment that has benefited all of humanity so greatly, the United States of America.
Yeah. You look at those things, you go, maybe not a bunch of coincidences. Something's going on.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Michael Medved, again, thank you. Appreciate your time today.
What a pleasure. Great talking to you, and thanks for the kind words.
All right, next week. And if you're catching this later, by the way, you can go to AmericanMiracleMovie.com and find out where it's available, but you want to see it in theaters. And again, that's June 9th through 11th only. So go get your tickets, fill the theater, be inspired and be a part of this great miracle that is America. I appreciate you guys being here. Hit the share, let people know about this quickly. We can pack out those theaters, and it'll help the whole industry and get more films made like this. But most of all, it'll inspire you and educate you. So we appreciate you listening today. If you haven't liked, follow, subscribe, Life Today TV, do that. See you again next time here on Life Today.